Well, welcome to Perspectives from WFSU Public Media. I'm Tom Flanagan. This program using the Zoom platform, although perhaps not too much longer. More on that to come. We pre-recorded this on Tuesday, June 15th for playback on Thursday, June 17th, and the show, of course, to be aired on WFSU FM, and we also will archive it on WFSU.org. Here's something, we love history, we sure do. Did you know that the nation's first ever Father's Day was celebrated on June 19th, 1910 in the state of Washington? But it wasn't until 1972, which was 58 years thereafter, that we had the official designation of the day. And until that, it was kind of an unofficial observance across the country. But in full disclosure, Mother's Day preceded it here in 1908. And it was in 1910 that many other states adopted Father's Day as kind of a companion observance in that regard. And there are an estimated 70 million dads in the United States right now, according to the latest stats that I saw from the U.S. government following the most recent census. Well, we have Father's Day coming up here this Sunday, and to talk about the observance and also to relay some personal experiences and also the significance of this day to all of us, because if we are not fathers, we are all at least offspring. So we have a real panel of experts to talk about it. We welcome back to Perspectives award-winning family advocate Jack Levine, founder of the Four Generations Institute. Jack, always a pleasure to see you, sir, and welcome back.
Thank you. The pleasure is all mine.
We have another very strong advocate when it comes to dads, and that is our own Leon County Sheriff, Walt McNeil. And sir, it is wonderful to see you, Walt. How's everything?
My pleasure, Tom. Good to see you and a great program. I'm looking forward to engaging.
Well, since I know that your time with us is kind of limited, other obligations, a call, Sheriff, talk about your advocacy here, because you have not just been, a very strong guy in the law enforcement community, but you've also kind of delved back into what makes for individuals to go off track, get off the rails, and unfortunately, in too many instances, wind up in the criminal justice system. You have been talking about strong families ever since I've known you, and re-articulate that for the audience, if you will, why you are such a big believer in that.
Well, Tom, thank you. And, families are the crux and the glue that holds our nation together. It's through families that we're able to achieve great things. And particularly fathers. Fathers play such a huge role in the development of their children. And unfortunately, Tom and Jack, there are so many children in America who don't get a chance to feel that the true meaning of the American dream, in large part because they're in families that are devoid of a father figure there. And, I grew up in Chicago, Illinois. I was born in Laurel, Mississippi. And my father was an alcoholic and was in and out of the house for various reasons. But the great thing about that is, and that's where community comes in, I can remember Mr. Nicholson, who lived about 4 houses down from us. And we didn't have encyclopedias. I knew nothing about the various books that that everybody reads at that age, 5, 6 years of age. Didn't have a book in the house at all. And but I could go down to Mr. Nicholson's house, so he would come down and get us off the playground and say, "You little knucklehead boys, come over here, you need to learn something." He'd take us into his house, and he was the first person to introduce me to a golf club. At the age of 6, never, don't know anything about golf, but he played golf, and he showed the boys in the neighborhood about golfing and that sort of thing. So it doesn't necessarily always mean that that your biological father is that father figure who makes that great impact and that impression upon your life. And that's why it's so important. We in the Leon County Sheriff's Office talk about all in, Tom, and we believe that's just simply another way of saying it takes a village to raise a child. It means that we all have to kind of pitch in and fit in where we can. And if there are kids out there, I having grown up in the circumstances which I did, one of my passions is trying to do everything we can to fill those voids and gaps in the lives of our children. And I've had so many people who've done that for me. I think back to Boy Scouting, and I think back to Little League Baseball, where I had a baseball coach that did more than coach me about baseball. He talked to me about life issues. The same thing with my swim coach when I was at the neighborhood swimming pool, and I didn't have the money to get in, so he would pay my way to get into the swimming pool to swim, and taught me how to swim. All those things that most of us get a chance to do with your fathers. There are kids in this community who won't have that opportunity, but there are many of us out there who can provide that opportunity for our kids, or for kids, if we just pitch in. That's why I'm so excited about what we're doing here with the Leon County Sheriff's Office with our scouting program. We just kicked off 2 new scouting areas here in Tallahassee, one at the Griffin Community Center, Griffin Heights community, and another in the Bond community, where our deputies are partnering with fathers who are becoming the Scout Masters. We're out there. In fact, I got to put a plug in right now. If there's anybody that wants to be a Scout Master at Bond or Griffin Elementary or Griffin Heights community, please contact the Leon County Sheriff's Office. We are looking for people to do that kind of thing in our community. And I can talk on and on about, Tom, about the need to have father figures and the fathers to be engaged. And I always say this, people sometimes misunderstand. I love my father like no other person, but he was a person that went into the military, had some very bad experiences while he was in the military, came back what they called back then shell-shocked. And so he was not able to fully engage with us as kids. So other people in the neighborhood knew that, and they stepped into the breach and helped us out. And I'm just, this is Father's Day coming up, and I'm calling all men to be fathers out there.
Well, that's great. And Jack Levine, as the founder of 4 Generations Institute, both you and I really had a strong paternal grounding, if you will, going back several generations. And that was kind of the genesis of what you did with the Institute and the message that it brings forward today, right?
Well, absolutely. I must pay a compliment. Sheriff McNeil, is a modest gentleman, but I will tell you the positions he has taken for the decades I've known him, and the positivism that he brings to the badge, to the star, is really meritorious of a tremendous amount of recognition, and the voters have recognized it. I just want to make sure that our entire community understands that this is a gentleman who has chosen to devote his life work based upon those very precedents that he just articulated. And it's not just here in Leon County, it's statewide, in fact, nationally. His activities with a group called Fight Crime, Invest in Kids is really a herald of that kind of absolute devotion. So I know, we're honored to have him. His support of our Children's Service Council vote back in November is just the most recent example of that. And yes, I think there's a similarity to what I have experienced. My father was an old man back when 60 was old. He and my mom got together, and I was created. He was also a blind man, and as I know you, Tom, know, and so does the sheriff, I grew up basically serving my father as his reader and his leader when it came to Unfamiliar Places. And I didn't know for 40 years or 50 years after that his disability, his age, his blindness were actually gifts to me. They were not, wrapped up in shiny paper and bows, but they were ways that I had to perform. And my interest in writing and reading and advocacy, I think, was rooted in those sessions of reading to my father. Now, I'm on a campaign, and it's not a political campaign. Don't get nervous. It's a campaign of language. And I am recommending as much as possible to convert the concept of Father's Day to Dad's Day. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. To me, being a father is biological, but being a dad is behavioral. There are many men who can and are already showing that they could be dads to a child, boys and girls, by being there when they're needed most. And it could be a volunteer guardian ad litem, it could be a foster or adoptive parent. It doesn't, again, have to be a bloodline, but it has to be a heartfelt commitment to want to step forward and say, I'm here for you. Now, nobody's perfect, and we have to be very careful in the realm of volunteerism because we certainly want to have background checks and all the necessary safeguards. The sheriff knows this as well as anybody else. But that said, I think there is an untapped reservoir of that kind of emotional connection that children need as mentors, as guides, whether it be, again, through coaching, through the interests that we all have as we mature. And now being a grandfather, I can even double down on that because, grandfathering brings that reality of legacy to bear. It's not morbid to say at some point we're going to be judged by what we left behind. And I think that's a very important theme, not only for celebration, but for real contemplation. So I'm pleased to be in the sheriff's presence. I'm pleased to have this message go out to our WFSU FM 88.9 listenership, because everybody who is interested can step forward to an array of opportunities in the community.
Well, Sheriff McNeil, let's talk about some of those opportunities. And if you could share some of the experiences of perhaps some young lives that were starting to get into some bad places that were pulled back from the brink, if you will, because of the kinds of interventions that both you and Jack were just talking about. Any that spring to mind, again, without mentioning names, but some examples of how this can work in a positive direction.
Yeah, Tom and Jack, let me start with a story. I'll work my way from the worst to the better outcomes, but I'll never forget the setting where our staff when I was Secretary of Department of Corrections, a young man at the age of 16, sentenced to prison, and had spent something on about 20 years in prison, and he's being released from prison. And my staff, I wasn't there to see it myself, but staff tells me that this young man begged and pleaded not to be released from prison, going back to the community, because as Jack was saying, he was nurtured in the prison system, and he had connected with the dad. For him, was one of the guards that worked there in the prison system. He had become sort of his father figure for him, and so now he's having to break away from all he's known. I mean, he's been in prison his entire adult life, and now he's going back to a community and has nothing to go back to. And that's just one of those horror stories. And so I wanted to kind of set that stage to move to the other piece of this, which is if we can get in front of with these kids in these communities. I'll tell you, one of the first things I was engaged in was the Urban League, where we saw these kids, and I won't call their name, but I will tell one's a minister right now here in Tallahassee. They were just gangbangers who were on the streets, had no idea about where they were going with their lives. And we sit down and we put, working with the Urban League through their youth program at the time, we put together, this was back during the days of rap, of course, and we put together a rap competition for these kids to give them something that they realized and they could relate to. And I can tell you that those kids who we put into a studio and let them cut records, and they got a little competition of their own where they did their own little dance steps, and we helped bring in all the acoustics and material they needed to write their songs and do all this stuff. And I will tell you, one of those kids, his father went on to be a professional singer. His father helped him when we got him in the right place. We had one go on to be a minister. Most of those kids went on to go to college. One went on to play football. So it just tells you that so much can be done if you just step in and try to help where you are. Moving forward, I personally, one of the kids that lived in the Joe Louis Street projects there, his mother called me up and just asked if I would mentor her son. And when you think about that, you say mentor a kid. Sometimes we think about that's going to be a big lift. We've got to spend all this time with this kid. No, it wasn't that at all, Tom and Jack. It was just simply being able to talk on the telephone. The kid would call you when things were going tough, just to be that person you can have a conversation with. And it makes a huge difference in that child's life. And that's why we've devoted, again, here in the sheriff's office, we see scouting as such an opportunity in our community. My son went through scouting. My daughter went through Girl Scouts, and we wanted to make sure that other kids had those same opportunities. And that's why we're focusing on doing some things with scouting. I also serve on the Boys and Girls Club here in Tallahassee. And the work we're doing with the Boys and Girls Clubs, we just had our annual burgers and steaks dinner where we bring these kids in, and you can hear their stories. They talk about the fact that, but for the Boys and Girls Club, they would have been in a life of drugs and crime. But the Boys and Girls Club, in those interactions, being able to go to a place every day after school to sit down and get your work done and see kids that are like yourself, gave them a sense of family away from family. And I talked about that in the speech that I gave to the Boys and Girls Clubs dinner, that family isn't just your nucleus family, but family can be found where you find people of common interest who care about you and really care about your life and how you're going to progress through life. And that's what the Boys and Girls Club offers. And lastly, I'll talk about Boys Town. I'm also on the board of Boys Town here in Tallahassee, and Boys Town offers housing. And my hat's off to the persons who work at Boys Town, the parents who these people volunteer, or I shouldn't say volunteer, they get paid to come in and become house parents for these kids. And they are able to, some of those kids come in with their failing grades, they've got mental health issues, they've got anger management issues, and these house parents are able to interact with these kids and turn their lives around. And I see what can be done. I see the commitment we have here in Leon County. And as Jack said, I think some of the things that we see in Leon County can be replicated in other communities around the state and around the country. But I think no better time for us to talk about the youth of our community, the youth of our nation, than in Father's Day. And I love what Jack just talked about, which is, biologically you're a father, but we can all be dads. I love that. That's a good way of looking at it, Jack.
Well, thank you, Sheriff. And Tom, I know our time this morning with the sheriff is limited, but I just want to make sure that he hears and we know that we're not disregarding or disrespecting women. The moms are really important too, and so are the grandmoms, and so are the neighbors and the women at church and other civic organizations. We believe in teamwork. In any aspect of children's lives, they need to know that there is a team approach to their well-being. So, moms need support as well, with Healthy Start and Healthy Families and other good programs. And that's why I'm so excited about our recently approved Children's Service Council, because it really becomes the center of attention for innovation to supplement what is not being provided by Department of Children and Families and Department of Juvenile Justice. And it really is a citizen's way of saying, I'm investing wisely in the future of our children. And they're off to a roaring start. Chief Judge John Sostrom is the chairman, and we're very excited about the Children's Service Council. So that's something that only 11 counties have established. but they're models for investment. And that's what's so wonderful. It's not only money investment, it's time investment. And those things married together really make for a better future for our kids.
Well, Jack, you mentioned the magic word time, and Sheriff McNeil, I know that you have to slip on out of here, but any final thoughts that you have as your time to depart draws nigh, sir?
Well, Tom, I will leave you all with a thought. I'll paraphrase from Frederick Douglass, which is really my anthem. It is much easier to prepare a child than to rebuild a man. Thank you all, and God bless.
Thanks so much, Sheriff Walt McNeil of Leon County, for being part of this very special pre-Father's Day perspectives here from WFSU Public Media. I'm Tom Flanagan, and a reminder that you can always catch the program online if you miss it on the radio, or if you hear it on the radio the first time and you'd like to go back and revisit it at any time. You can just go to WFSU.org. That's our website. We try to have the most recent program up as soon as we can after it actually appears on the radio, and you can go back and listen to it again and again. Jack Levine, the founder of the Four Generations Institute, remains on the air with us here as we talk about the importance of parents in general. And that was a good point you just brought up, Jack. You don't want to be exclusive when it comes to these kinds of influences on young people. A very good friend of mine, and I think you know her pretty well too, Dr. Sally Carrioth, over at the School of Nursing, and one of the nation's preeminent grief counselors. Whenever, my gosh, there's a tragedy, they usually at places like CNN and all that, it gives Sally a call so she can kind of salve the national hurt, if you will. But she said that young people are like nature. As nature abhors a vacuum, so do young people abhor the vacuum in their lives when it comes to adult care and guidance as they grow up. And if they don't have any positive examples, they will find the nearest one they can, which very possibly might be negative and not all that good. This is going to happen, so we need to get them in a position where they have the best influencers that they possibly can have.
Well, I think about it through the lens of what I call the 3 E's, Tom. There's the emotional side, the educational side, and the economic side. And, back when 35, 45 years ago, we were talking more about investing in children, we didn't really have the research. We had common sense. We knew that children left alone do not do well. But now more than ever, we have phenomenal research, and the research points in the same direction. The earlier, the better. So when we look at the emotional side, we know actually babies start learning about their environment in utero. I don't mean that they understand the words, but they understand if there's stress in the pregnant woman, that stress translates into how they actually feel, and they actually get ready for birth. Then, of course, there is the early months and years of relating to children. And again, there's a difference between discipline and punishment. And I really believe that children learn discipline by really understanding the building blocks of being satisfied, not only in the food they eat, but in the nurturance that is within their own environment. And then, of course, there's the education. Early childhood education is indispensable in later life. If a child does not know, the basics of alphabet and colors and proper words, then that child starts kindergarten way behind. So we have great research and now great investments in early childhood. And you know who some of our best teammates are for that right now are the business community. We've got the Florida Chamber of Commerce. We've got Florida Tax Watch. We've got a really spectrum of business people who say, it's not whether we pay, it's when, and we don't want to pay for failure if we know how to invest in success. And that's the educational block. And then there is the economic block. Again, we want a generation of young people who understand commerce and understand how it is that they could invest their own education into a profitable outcome, not only to amass money, but to amass a better community. And again, this almost sounds like a dream world, but more and more we're making these steps in the right direction. I think we have a lot of confidence that an action like supporting a Children's Service Council, 67% yes in November of 2020. That's called an affirmation. And that means we've got to have accountable dollars. We've got to have measurable outcomes, but we're on the track to doing that here in Leon County. And I have a feeling that we're going to become a model for that kind of accountability. So Tom, Sheriff McNeil always says it best because he speaks from the heart, which is, let's not miss the opportunities because regret is a painful lesson.
Coming off of one of the most traumatic situations I think that most of us have endured, at least since, probably in many instances, World War II, Jack, the impact that the pandemic has had on children, with many families forced into some pretty dire straits because of not just the economics of the situation, but sometimes the emotional fallout. I'm thinking of a family in particular where the father, who had been an office worker, and he'd go to the office every day and come back home and play with the kids and all that, was put in a situation where the only viable employment open to him was essentially a long haul truck driver, because he had a CDL in his hip pocket and he was able to leverage that. And so he had to be away from home for extended periods of time while mom is going through additional stress and all. And that isn't just an isolated incident. Many families have gone through those sorts of situations with the pandemic. What do you think the outflow from that is going to be on a longer term basis that we'll have to deal with when it comes to kids and their future?
Well, obviously, Tom, we're dealing with a situation that from the very beginning was kind of out of our control. And then there was some appropriate medical interventions that did its best to both research and produce a vaccine. Now, it's not the be all and end all to the stress and to the proliferation of the problem, but it is in fact a tried and true preventive policy. However, we've got large populations in our communities right here in Tallahassee, Leon County, and throughout Florida who have not taken the opportunity to be vaccinated. Now, some people call that a controversial standpoint, that everyone should take this opportunity. And I'm not saying throw people in Sheriff McNeil's jail if they don't, but I am saying, how dare we not take the preventative step of going through full vaccination, because it is proven that it is a preventative not only for the individual, but for the community. So we're kind of well on our way from the presidential level. We are seeing a tremendous amount of guidance, but I think that's very important. Now, to your point specifically on the impact of children, honesty is the best policy when it comes to children, but not to be scaring them, not to be afraid of others. What we have to do, I think, is listen to our psychologists and listen to our professionals who say, open up a conversation with our children. Don't ignore it. They're going to be hearing all kinds of tales of anguish. They may see it in their own family, maybe an elder who got ill with the virus. So I think the honesty is necessary for children. I'll give you an example of that. I heard a story, a friend of mine in Orlando told me the story that the child in the family, a 6-year-old, started realizing that that there were people who he knew who could not be seen because they were in a quarantine. And in his mind, quarantine was the next step for death. and he was afraid of death. There had been some experiences the family suffered with the loss. So what this friend of mine came up with was this idea. She happens to be an educator, is to recognize that giving the child hope that you can get better when you get ill. The idea that there is medicine or there is medical treatment to give the child a kind of more positive view. Now that is not a guarantee, but it helped the child to understand that we have some power. We're not powerless when it comes to medical conditions. And that's important on the preventive side, like I mentioned, the vaccine, but it's also important on the curative side. Good nutrition, recognizing that we have personal practices of hygiene that are necessary. So those are lessons that I think can be taught even in pandemic time. And I'm feeling a sense of optimism, although we have a ways to go, but more and more folks want to get together. They want to convene. They want to be entertained. They want to be absorbed into their interests. And we should not exclude children from that positivism if we could invest the time necessary that they need.
Particularly, Jack, since sadly, we lost a lot of, especially grandparents, but also moms and dads in the course of the pandemic. And there are more families now kind of rudderless and certainly grieving than we had a year and a half ago.
Yes, and grief is its own disability in a way because it affects us physically and emotionally. And what we have to do, I'm not a psychologist, but once in a while, I hang around with professionals who tell me what their experience has taught them. And you mentioned Sally Karioff, and I know that there are ways of talking things through. That doesn't mean it solves the problem, but holding back and being silent and ignoring the realities are usually not a positive path to for child well-being. So I say we need to be open and honest. We cannot disguise the fact that there are some issues that we need to address, but what children need is partners in the conversation. And again, I'm not a big fan of too much technology for kids. I think there's a lack of reality in certain of these technologies. So, I believe that until age 3, we should really limit screen time for children and have much more face-directed conversation. And, children, they learn what they live. And if our parents are too immersed in technology, then they're not relating to their children. So that's one of my pleas, is to at least balance that and don't consider to the television or the computer or the handheld device to be the babysitter. We need to be with our children. They need to hear our voice. They need to know that we want to be with them and read to them and relate to them in nature. Being out in the natural world is very positive, but we should not have children who are, afraid of getting a little dirty sometimes, or afraid of commuting with nature. So communing with nature. Sometimes it takes a commute, but I mean communing with nature. And that's why the physical world is very, very important to expose our children to.
I so vividly recall my parents essentially tossing me out of the house on a nice day and saying, go play in the woods and don't come back until sunset. And there was no fear of child abduction or any of these sorts of things. The worst that could happen, I don't know, you skin your knee when you fall down the embankment or something like that. But not to get too much back into the past, there was no golden age after all. But Jack, it does seem that a few generations ago, there appeared to be more positive role models for parenthood, perhaps, than what we have today. Or at least as children, we kind of looked at, your dad, my dad, they knew what the heck they were doing, or at least it seemed that way to us as kids. And very often today, it seems like there are many ostensible adults who don't really fulfill that role and don't provide that kind of role modeling for the kids. If that is in fact a need, how do we, I guess, prepare people to be better parents before it actually happens? Is there a way to do that?
Well, yes. I do want to take just one or two steps back, though, with a comment you made a moment ago, because I think we need a little bit of understanding that in many ways, the good old days were not so good. In many ways, we had barriers that we set up, racial animosity, which still exists to some degree, but by no means was it the brutality and the forced segregation that we had. Again, we still have a long road to travel for that. It's also true that that the economics of family life, it has become, frankly, more and more difficult. It used to be that with one full-time wage earner within the house, a suitable, safe home ownership, and if this was the interest of the family, a higher education was really affordable without deep debt. And that's not the case anymore. So in some ways, we have kind of separated the quote American dream from many, many wage earners and folks who do need a second and third job just to make ends meet. I'm not wringing my hands about it. I think these are just economic realities that we need to understand. And sometimes when you have to, work a 60-hour week rather than a 30 or 40-hour week, that's time away from our children. That all said, I think there's this reservoir of opportunity in our retirees. One of the reasons I founded Four Generations Institute is the demography of living longer also gives us a certain openness in our calendar. Now, that's not true for everybody, but if we look at the 55, 65, 75, 85-year-olds, as long as they're healthy and eager, can be tremendous resources for our children. One of the campaigns that I'm pulling together now right here in Leon County is building that intergenerational bridge. We're going to start in areas like helping foster kids understand that higher ed is a very, very important option for them. We've got great programs now at FSU with Unconquered Scholars. We have similar programs at FAMU and TCC to open the door for foster youth to imagine college. 5-10 years ago, the percentage of foster youth who actually entered higher ed was less than 3%. Now, thankful to several great leaders statewide, an organization called Educate Tomorrow is the ringleader for that, and the Florida College Access Network. We're seeing more young people realize at age 12 and 13, not waiting till they're 17 and 18, that higher education is a possibility. We have passed laws that have allowed them free tuition as long as they keep a certain number of credits, and even a living stipend. I give you that as an example. What they need also, though, is connections with some experienced adults who have an interest not only in helping young people, but an interest in what they did during their active work life. It could be science, it could be the arts, it could be an array, it could be broadcasting. Whatever folks have done in their professional life, chances are they're interested in sharing that. Anything from woodworking all the way through high technology. So tapping into the experience of older adults is our great threshold that I think we need to build and create. Again, Tom, it's not for everybody, but frankly, we might not need everybody, but we've got 70,000 Leon Countyans under age 20 years old, and we have 70,000 Leon Countyans over age 50. It's symmetrical. So what about 10% of each of those groups? Getting 7,000 teens and 7,000 over 50-year-olds connected, again, with the right background checks and the right plan of supervision. Not 50 hours a week, maybe it's only 5 hours a month, but those could be quality hours. So I call it time philanthropy, Tom. That's my word for it. It's a giving of your lifelong treasury of time and experience for the youth generation. And stay tuned, we're going to make this happen. And the Children's Service Council, I believe, will like to be one of the repositories of that use of time.
You can only play so many games of golf before it becomes oppressively boring, Jack. I think that's a great idea. And to give a shout out to our former colleague, our morning edition anchor for 17 years on WFSU, Ronald J. Eben. He was in his late 70s when he hooked up with, I believe, it was Big Brothers Big Sisters, and he adopted a young man from the city's south side, and that was his little brother. And he, a couple hours a week, would go over to the young man's house and sit down, and they would read books together. And Ronald J. told me that was one of the most fulfilling, enjoyable activities that he had ever been involved with, and he highly recommended it to anyone who had a few extra hours a week to invest in a young life.
You know, Tom, that brings up such a very important point I'd like to underline in a moment or two, which is this is about mutuality. All relationships are about giving and getting, and the intergenerational bridge is a two-way bridge. It not only assists those who are young, it assists we who are experienced, because again, it's uplifting. And the idea of being a spectator in life, or as you say, playing golf a couple of times a week, but maybe not 5 times a week. That's just one example, not to diss those who enjoy a golf game, but I would say, like the sheriff said, how about doing a little golf instruction or taking lessons together as an opportunity. We have a great library system in Leon County. You know, those books are ready to be handled and opened and read, and life experience, you know, in literature, in the history of how things were created, I think is phenomenally fascinating. You know, Tom, so we've got these 2 granddaughters and now they're 3.5, Julianne, and 7 months, Molly Joy. And it is absolutely, even though they live way, way on the West Coast of the United States, it is phenomenal how much joy and presence they bring, even in technology, speaking to them over FaceTime. And the reason Charlotte and I really, really have embraced grandparenting is we were warned. We were warned for decades. You know, we've been together as a couple for 45 years, but we were warned someday when you get those grandchildren, hopefully, of course, they'll be healthy and well, is that will be a kind of a new ticket to ride into your senior years. And I am telling you, there's almost nothing we wouldn't do for them, not only, of course, in the physical sense, but in the emotional sense. And I think there are a whole lot of grandparents out there who know what I'm talking about. And the gift of time for children is an irreplaceable gift. It's so essential in both directions. So that's my urgency, and that's my plea, is let's invest time in each other, and it will pay great dividends.
Disney's Lion King is not the only situation in which the great circle of life is illustrated with such a beauty. Yeah, they are a blessing for sure. And to see your legacy pass on from one generation to another, or in your case, 4 generations there, Jack, we reference back to the Institute. It's an incomparable kind of experience. What's a good father or grandfather present coming up here on this observance? So many people, again, we're not going to the office as much as we used to, so the obligatory tie is probably out. But what do you think would be a more meaningful kind of present to accompany the observance?
Tom, I love the question because, the idea that we honor, it's one of the commandments, honor thy father and thy mother, and I would go ahead and extend it to let's honor thy grandfather and grandmother, is to give a gift of charity in their name. In other words, if a grandparent has a special cause, it could be animal protection, it could be feeding the homeless, it could be whatever is their cause or two that they're affiliated with, perhaps where they worship or where they're a member of a civic club. To give a gift in someone's honor, to me, is so meaningful on several levels. Number one is it means they're having an impact in their causes, and that's important. But the next step is it means that we are not giving a thing, we are giving a present of support for a good cause. And that elevates people, that makes them feel, I think, so welcome into the community that they are hoping to improve. So I say we should have the Healthy Start folks should be giving gifts to their elders on behalf of the newborns who they may never meet. If you are a guardian ad litem, a gift to one of the foster care charities in their honor. Again, if you're interested in animal protection or the natural world, a gift to one of those charities. And more and more, that is, it's not out at the store, but it's within the realm of contributions, and those gifts pay great dividends. So that's what I recommend, and we are doing that in our own family now, holidays as well as celebrations like Mother's Day and Father's Day.
What a great honor for someone to say, I am going to help make the world a better place in your name. How lovely is that, huh?
Yeah, the tears do flow, and flowers are very nice. And I'm not saying instead of the tangibles, so it's in complement to the tangibles. We do want folks out, being patrons to our restaurants, and we do want some tangible gifts, but I think in all things, balance is important. And charitable contributions is a very important way of acknowledging someone's effect on the community and their leadership in the family.
Just a few minutes left. And Jack Levine, what's ahead for you besides Father's Day, Grandfather's Day in this instance, and the promulgation of the Four Generations Institute? What's next on your calendar?
Well, this last year and a half has given me contemplative time. Our back porch has a fan and it's screened in. So, they say the prophets always found their space in the wilderness to figure out how they want to prophesize. And my back porch has kind of served as that function in the last year and a half. And what I've determined is, despite the fact that for 44 years I've traveled the state, primarily the state, extensively, and made friends in all 67 counties and maintained that communication through my 4gen letters, I decided to stay home for the next couple of years to really concentrate on this dynamic community called Tallahassee, called Leon County. The Children's Service Council is getting a lot of my attention. I'm doing some things on campus. I have some ideas in terms of doing a little bit more writing and a little bit more speaking. But the bottom line is I'm very, very comfortable with our backyard garden. I'm very, very comfortable with the amenities of a wonderful town called Tallahassee, and I'll be participating much more locally. So, it's an aspiration to resist saying yes out in the other parts of Florida. And my friends will understand if I recommend alternatives to my presence. And yet I think there's so much that can be done, which will be exemplar, because if you do something in Tallahassee, lots of people find out about it because they come here to get their government affairs taken care of, or to visit one of the major universities. So we'll get the word out, but I'm staying close to home as much as I can for the next couple of years.
Well, as you pointed out to Sheriff Walt McNeil earlier in the program, if we can set up some templates, some things that work and work well, those then can serve as examples for other parts of the state or even the nation as we wrestle with a lot of pretty serious problems right now. And gee, the rest of the state's loss is certainly our gain, Jack. It'd be great to have you close to home and so involved with all the things that are going on here in the capital city. And I hope we can continue our periodic conversations both in this venue and in others, because you are certainly a font of wisdom and great information for me, and I think anyone who has ever come in contact with you.
And Tom, I must put in a plug for public broadcasting. I'm a participant every single day with my both very, very good working ears and eyes. And I think public broadcasting is one of the true gems that deserve support. So you didn't ask me to say this, but I must tell you that what we have in our public radio and television networks is truly a gem worthy of our time and money.
Well, you helped to make it so with your participation and your support, Jack. We appreciate that more than you ever know. And thank you again for coming on Perspectives. Happy Father's Day to you, buddy.
Okay. Happy Dad's Day to you, Tom.
Thanks so much, Jack Levine. And thanks to Leon County Sheriff Walt McNeil, who participated in the program a little bit earlier today. Perspectives produced by WFSU Public Media in Tallahassee. Thanks to Taylor Cox pushing the buttons there today. Also Paul Dam, Amy Diaz de Villegas, Devin Bittner, Brandon Brown, Tricia Moynihan, and Lydell Rawls. Our Director of Content, Kim Kelling, is the Executive Producer. And I'm Tom Flanagan. Well, next week, we'll get the latest on Leon County's Remembrance Project, an effort to acknowledge a dark chapter in our community's history in the hopes that a firm grasp on our history will prevent those days from ever returning. That's going to be our discussion next week on Perspectives right here from WFSU Public Media. Take care.